what's the difference between using the clutch to turn tightly and coasting? Coasting would be pulling the clutch in and just letting the bike travel along without any engine braking like that. However, actively using the clutch to do a slow tight turn, by which we mean pulling the clutch in and then gently reintroducing it as we come around the turn, is not coasting. So I'm doing a little bit of footage today just to cover off how we use the clutch to turn tightly and to show that it's not coasting. The purpose of using the clutch in a slow tight turn is to give you more control over the turn. If we were in a gear with the clutch fully out, there's always the possibility that you're going to run wide, either by mistake through going in too quickly, or giving it too much throttle as you come around the bend, or even just catching a bump as you go over it and around the bend. And if you're turning left and you run wide, you'll run wide into oncoming traffic. If you're turning right and you run wide, then you'll run in towards the curb or go up the curb if you're unfortunate enough not to have that amount of control over your line. So on a wide turn like this, we don't need to use the clutch. For this turn it's quite tight. I'm in second gear and I'm covering the clutch. For this next one it's very, very tight, so I'm going to bring my speed down on the approach. I'm in second gear, I'm pulling the clutch in, and as I come around I'm holding it on the bike point in order that I can keep my line to where I want to keep my line. If I hadn't used the clutch, then I would have run out wide towards the central white line, which would have put me in danger for any oncoming traffic. Once again, this is really tight, so I'm now in second gear. I'm good to go, but I need to use the bike point to keep that line really tight. Some people say you're saying to your students, pull the clutch in for a tight turn, that's coasting. It's not coasting. It's actually giving us far more control over the bike, not far less control over the bike. Coasting gives you less control, because correctly, as people are saying, it takes away all the engine braking. But what we're not suggesting people do is just pull the clutch in, keep it all the way in and coast around the corner. That's not what we're saying. We are using the clutch and the bike point to control the bike, to control the line, to control the power delivery and the speed delivery, so that nothing sudden and nothing unusual happens. It's no different to using the clutch the way you would use it for a U-turn. It's simply that we're doing half a U-turn if we're turning left or right. So turning left at the end of this road, bringing the speed down, coming down through the gears, third, second, clutch is in, having a look, now reintroducing the clutch, and off we go. And if I'd done that with the clutch fully out in the second gear, it would be likely that I would have run wide, or wouldn't have had as much control as I had by pulling it in and gently reintroducing as I come around the turn. On the wider turns, we don't need to use the clutch in the same manner, because we can carry speed around those turns and take a wider turn itself. It's the tighter turns where we need to go slower to hold our line nice and tight, where using the clutch can give you that added element of control. And you have to remember that riding a bike is totally different to driving a car. In a car, we wouldn't push the clutch down all the way and come around the turn, slipping the clutch around the turn. But cars are totally different to motorbikes. Unless you're carrying excessive speed into a tight turn, you're unlikely to swing wide, but motorbikes are quite easy to swing wide with if you give it just the tiniest little bit too much throttle with the clutch out, or the tiniest bit too much clutch just when you're using the bike points. So try not to compare clutch use with cars and bikes, because it's very, very different. So turning left, this is a tight left turn, bringing my speed down. I'm in second gear, and I'm going to pull the clutch in just as I tuck in, and then gently reintroduce as I come round, so I can control where I land. So it's pulling the clutch in momentarily just to take the power away, and then bringing it back through the bike point very slowly, so you're controlling your exact position and placing the tyres precisely where you want to place them. rather than just finding that you land somewhere. And that is distinct to coasting, which would have just been pulling the clutch in and rolling it round the bend, which I wouldn't recommend because you would lose control, in the sense that you wouldn't be able to control your line so well. You wouldn't have that engine braking or the use of the bite point to control the speed, which is what we're doing. We recommend that students, when they're riding below 20 miles an hour, cover the clutch so they're ready to use it if they need to. So as we bring our speed down for a mini roundabout, second gear, as I come into it, I'm on the bite point, and at the moment it's wide enough that I can ease the bite point out, but my hand remained over the clutch whilst I was below the 20 miles an hour. And again, I'm covering the clutch as I come round in case I need to use it. So imagine if you're coming around a bend and you haven't had the foresight to look up the road far enough in front of you and something happens, you can quite easily pull the clutch in immediately, start bringing your speed down. And there's a big difference between having the clutch in because you're just randomly pulling the clutch in, and actively using the bite point of the clutch to help you to maintain full control over your machine. There's also a difference between braking and coasting. So when we're slowing down, if we were slowing down from 70 miles an hour, we would start with deceleration sense, so mirrors, and then rolling off the throttle. We'd then start with brakes to add into the slowing down process. And as we were reducing our speed, we'd be coming down through the gears into the appropriate gear for the speed we were reducing to. So say we're in 6th gear at 70 miles an hour, we'd do some braking, we'd come down to 50 miles an hour, where we might start thinking about coming down into 5th gear. Then we'd come down to 35 to 30 miles an hour, where we might start thinking about coming down into 4th gear. Each of these times we would then be reintroducing the clutch whilst we were braking and using the engine braking in all of those gears. By the time we get down to about 20 miles an hour, personally I would keep braking, but I would pull the clutch in and start coming down through the rest of the gears, keeping the clutch in whilst braking. Now again, that's not coasting, because you're using the brakes to slow the bike down from what is a relatively slow speed. So here, for example, the clutch is in, I'm coming down into 1st gear, and I'm bringing it to a smooth controlled stop. And it's all about using your machine and using your controls with a purpose. So I wouldn't be pulling the clutch in whilst I was braking at 70 miles an hour, because I wouldn't be gaining any engine braking at those higher speeds, and the engine braking is more important at the higher speeds than at the slower speeds. So it's about knowing what you're doing. I'm doing it with a purpose. You're actively considering why you're using those controls at any moment in time. I choose to pull the clutch in somewhere between 20 and 15 miles an hour when I'm slowing down, because I like the smoothness of the stop that the brakes give me alone, as opposed to reintroducing the clutch and using more of the engine braking. But it's not coasting, because the brakes are actively slowing the bike down at that time, and it's not dangerous because the speeds are slow. So I don't need the engine braking at those speeds. So I'm bringing my speed down, I'm coming down into 2nd gear, 1st gear, and I'm going to use the bite point to control my speed. I'm still on the bite, 2nd gear, bringing it through. So again, the clutch wasn't fully out, so was I coasting? No, because I was using the bite point of the clutch to control the bike, to control the power delivery, the speed and the line. Relatively tight bend coming up, but I can do this one in the 3rd gear with the clutch out, because it's not silly tight, it's not a tight turn. These tight turns that we're talking about tend to be left and right turns that are a tight right angle or less than a right angle. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope that it explains a little bit more why we use the clutch when we use the clutch, and why we're recommending to students that they pull the clutch in for the tighter turns and use the clutch. So here, for example, I'm actually in 1st gear turning tightly using the clutch. I'm not just bringing it down and trying to turn with the clutch fully out, which is far less safe, especially for learner riders. Learner riders are far more likely to use the controls in a harsh manner. So they may have slowed down enough for the bend, but then they'll open the throttle quite suddenly or quickly in the bend, or they'll catch a bump and the throttle will go whoa, whoa, which you don't want to do. We know how to control that as experienced riders, but perhaps learner riders don't have that element of control or experience as to how to deal with it. But even as a non-learner, so an experienced rider, I still use the clutch to turn tightly because it allows me to have maximum control over the machine. With this turn, I could do the turn without using the clutch, so I'm going to do it without clutch. But it's far less easy to control my line than it would have been if I just dipped the clutch in, like now, and then gently reintroduced, so that I can control precisely where those tyres land through the power delivery. Thanks for watching. I hope this makes a little bit more sense now when you hear me talking about dipping the clutch or using the clutch for those slow tight turns. And I'll see you soon.